As per usual, we're sitting down for a conversation that we call Attempted Intelligence. This time we do have a central concept, and more or less it's riffing off of something that we've already talked about, which is the idea that for learning, right, one of the central mechanisms for learning is more likely than not the ability to detect an error. If you cannot detect an error, there's no reason to learn. The idea as to where to situate yourself to engage that type of situation is not with like-minded people, or not necessarily with like-minded people, because that may be the wrong description, but not necessarily with people who already agree with everything you believe.
Okay.
You are more likely to be served for learning's sake by engaging people who are dissimilar in larger degrees from you now. Right. So the way to describe this, or attempt to describe this, is to use historical examples. Right. So a historical example that some people may know, some people may not know, depending on what they're interested in, would be the Meiji Restoration in Japan. Okay. Did you know anything about the Meiji Restoration in Japan? Did you look this up after I said?
Did.
Okay.
I did.
Okay. So you know it was fast.
Yes, it was.
Like
fast.
it exceedingly fast. Okay, so.
Well, the basic gist of it that I got was that they. I'm just trying to word it because it was.
Sure.
I looked up several different sources, so it was just different.
Which is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you'll get the dissimilarity and then be able to sew something together that's meaningful to you, and then is subject to revision by another level of dissimilarity.
Fair enough. In a nutshell.
Oh, it's me in a nutshell. I hope you remember that.
I do not. That's
Austin
why.
Powers. Well, that's me in a nutshell. No, this is me in a nutshell. Help, I'm in a nutshell.
No, it's funny.
Okay.
Okay, so it was the adoption of Western ways to. I don't know if colonization is the right word, but just Western ways were trying to take over Japan. This is where the East, anyway. Sorry.
Okay.
And what I read was that they sent diplomats and learned about Western ways and brought it back and kind of, what do you call it, restored imperialism with adopted Western ways so that they could stop the West from basically taking over.
I have a really good feeling that your sources were like the top 3 hits on Google.
I went down to 10.
Okay.
I went down to 10.
Okay. So the Meiji Restoration, so there's going to be different things to say about it and different angles on specified details. But essentially Japan for many years had maintained an external trading relationship that was exclusive to the Portuguese.
Okay.
Right? Was it the Portuguese? No, it was the Dutch. They were mad at the Portuguese because the Portuguese sent the Jesuits and they didn't appreciate that. And this was within the Warring States period, the Sengoku-Jidai. And then after Japan was essentially united, and there were very specific people, William Adams being one of them, the English navigator who became Mura Anjin, he was made a samurai. He said, no, what those guys are saying isn't the whole thing. We don't agree with them over in Europe. And they're like, right. So what ended up happening is, although he was English, he had come with the Dutch. Okay. And the Dutch had done a pretty good job of creating trade routes through Asia, especially kind of through the Indian Ocean and going up. What happened was, after the Sengoku-Jidai, after the Warring States period, when Japan became more united, they said, we're going to have an exclusive trading relationship with the Dutch. Okay. So the Dutch were able to continue coming in. So when people say Japan closed its doors to foreigners, it's not true. Okay. There was relations.
Because I did read that, where they closed it to foreigners.
But there were relations, right? And it was specifically mostly a monopoly between the Japanese and the Dutch. So Japanese products could get out, but only through the Dutch.
So I read deeper in that the Japanese and the Chinese they had a whole bunch of treaties coming in from the West.
Oh, that would have happened forever.
Right. But they weren't happy with them. So
well, why would you ever be happy with a treaty? right? It means that you don't get everything that you want. You've got to give somebody else what they want. Well,
Compromise.
be happy. Be happy with the treaty? What are you, out of your mind?
Right.
You just do it so that you stop getting shot.
Right.
No, almost nobody would ever be happy with a treaty being maintained, because the people who won in the treaty want more.
Right.
And the people who lost in the treaty want more. So that would be a very generalized thing. Anyways, Okinawa, you know about Okinawa? Okinawa, do you know that it was not called Okinawa, it was the Ryukyu Kingdom?
I heard it, didn't remember.
Okay, so the Ryukyu Kingdom was its own thing, very small chain of islands, physically small. They, for a period of time, they were a client state of, or a tributary to China, so they just gave China money, and China was like, cool. And then the Japanese were like, hey, you're getting money from them? No, you're giving us money too. So there was a period of time where the Ryukyu Kingdom was tributary to China and Japan. The Japanese said, you're mine, right? But that was much later. So that was, I think, after the Sino-Japanese War, or maybe the Sino-Russian. Anyways, basic idea of the Meiji Restoration is that they were in contact with the outside world, right? Some of the best guns that were being made in the 1700s were being made in Japan. It's just nobody knew about it because they stayed in Japan. Right. So the samurai used lots of guns.
Yes.
Lots of guns. So the basic idea is that there was an external relationship primarily through the Dutch, but what ended up happening is people knew that Japan existed and they wanted in, but they couldn't kind of break through that agreement, through that exclusivity with the Dutch. So what ended up happening, I don't remember the general, the admiral's name, Admiral something, U.S. Naval Admiral. He's like, he just steamed right in, black smoke pouring out. He shot some cannons and he said, we're coming in. And you guys are going to trade with us, right? So upon that contact, the Japanese said, oh, the way we're doing stuff now is likely not going to give us an advantage in the way that the world exists as it is right now. We need to do something, right? Like, we can continue on as we are, but we're not going to have any advantages. We're going to lose.
Is that where they decided to modernize? Or?
So what they did is they said, we're going to purposely send Japanese diplomats around the world. They're going to gather information, they're going to come back, and we're going to be awesome. Right? So what ended up happening through that process was, early on, they would economically contract out stuff that they weren't good at until they were good at it. Oh. So there was a period where the Japanese were building, so they were paying to build modern warships in I don't remember the specific port, but it's a major shipbuilding port in the UK. They were paying to build ships there, and then the English were looking at it and being like, they're building better ships in our port than we are. Right. And then what ended up happening is, as the Japanese increased their skill with respect to shipbuilding and with respect to running those ships, actually piloting them, as far as naval navigation is concerned, they just said, we're going to do it ourselves. So they increased their industrial capacity extremely fast. But what they did was they said, our knowledge will not, and our practices will not compete in this world that we didn't engage with.
So they had to go out and learn from different.
Right? They're from people with dissimilarity, but they didn't do it because they thought everybody else was awesome. They did it selfishly. They're like, well, we want to be able to compete. Right. So they went and engaged with that dissimilarity, right? And it worked extremely fast. I think it was 40 years. They essentially revolutionized the country, and they were top class like that. And it's because they purposely said, the way that we're doing it is not competitive. Right. We need to go out and figure out what can be competitive. So another place, did you look up Operation Paperclip?
I did.
Okay. Did it get weird and really fast? Or did it make sense?
Again, I think my understanding of it would be simplistic, so I can just start with mine and you can expand. But I read that the U.S. started recruiting Nazi Nazi engineers and what's the other word? Scientists, engineers, brains of Nazis, bringing them over so that they could advance. I guess it was during the Cold War, or
Okay, so do you know the very specific time that occurred at? And where they were?
Where they were, no.
Physically where they were?
No.
I don't remember the specific city, but I don't know if it was Nuremberg or Stockholm. International Court of Justice or whatever it is. But anyways, I think it was Nuremberg. The Nuremberg trials. So after World War II, they basically rounded up the big deal Nazis and put them in jail. And then what happened was U.S. intelligence agencies were aware of people who had advanced scientific knowledge in whatever field.
Right.
And what they would do is they would send in intelligence operatives to the prisons. And the files on these prisoners, so they had a paperclip on them. So, and it might not have even been directly intelligence operatives. It might have just been the people interfacing with them in a legal way. And if the file had a paperclip, it's like, you need to get these out and to us.
Right.
So they transported a fair amount of, people who would have been employed by the Nazis, whether or not they had Nazi ideals,
Right.
can be questioned depending on the specific individuals. The most famous being Werner von Braun.
Yes.
Werner von Braun was essentially the father of, he's like #1 rocket science.
Yeah.
He's literally a rocket scientist.
Yeah.
So essentially he was the father of the rocket program through NASA. He happened to, for whatever series of reasons, have advanced knowledge there. Now, one of the really interesting things, I think it would have been prior, based on things that had been historically occurring in Europe, but the Weimar Republic, so more or less between World War I and World War II, there was very advanced scientific knowledge located heavily in Germany. Mm-hmm. Quite a few people left in the interwar years, such as Einstein. Einstein said, I can't stay here, so he went to America. But what ended up happening with Operation Paperclips is the Americans purposefully recruited people, they brought them over, and then they more or less shielded them, right? The Russians, did you find out about the Russians?
I read the Russians, but there wasn't enough information where I was reading.
So what did the Russians do? Did the Russians recruit Nazi scientists as well?
I believe they did.
But what did they do with them after they got the knowledge?
I didn't get that.
They just said, go back. So the Russians basically took the knowledge as quick as they could and they sent them back.
Right.
They said, get out of here, we don't want you anymore.
Right.
Like they just didn't want to keep them.
Right.
The Americans kept them and shielded them. But what that shows is that there are times when there is a disproportionate amount of knowledge in a specific place for a wide variety of historical reasons. Right. And there is historical processes by which you will take advantage of that. The Americans did it by bringing the Nazi scientists over and keeping them and shielding them. The Germans took them and then got the knowledge and kicked them out.
Right.
Do you know what is claimed to be currently happening with China? Like, China's made huge leaps. It's an extremely sophisticated country technologically. Do you know how they've done it?
Yeah.
Or what the claim is as to how they've done it? China specifically has sent people in graduate programs and postgraduate programs, so graduates, students, so master students and PhD students outside of China to engage with the knowledge of the outside world. Now, they haven't necessarily repatriated them. They haven't said, come back and give us the knowledge. Right. The claim, whether or not this is accurate, I don't have enough information, but the claim is essentially those Chinese students who are still Chinese citizens but working their professional careers in other countries will send the information back. So China is claimed to basically be stealing all the technological secrets, and they'll take them in, they'll do it, and then they'll refine after.
Right.
So the initial outlay, they don't want to do the initial outlay. They'll let you do the first work. They'll take it.
Right.
They kind of won't. They might make it their own after, and oftentimes, depending on the specific technology that you're looking at, it's like, well, you didn't even do it good. The easiest place to see it is fighter jets. I don't know if you look at fighter jets often, but there are there's two. It's the J-20, I think that's the Dragon Lady, and then there's another one where it's they're basically almost direct knockoffs of the F-22 and the F-35, right? But the engines aren't that strong, and the back-end stealth sucks. Right. So one of the things about the American stealth program, especially the F-22, is the heat signatures were fairly well shielded, right? So the Russian stealth plane is stealth on the front. It's like party in the front, or business in the front, party in the back, because you can see the heat signature. Okay. But anyways, that's kind of getting off into some other stuff that's not necessary. But China is taking that dissimilarity, the knowledge that they didn't have, and they're making it their own.
Right.
Another place that this has occurred that some people might be able to attach to easier. Mixed martial arts. Do you remember the first UFC?
No.
So it was essentially built style against style. The whole point of the initial UFC that some people are not aware of was for the Gracie family, the creators of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Right.
What they learned was early Kodokan Judo, which had ground fighting. Kodokan Judo initially was almost all throws because of Jigoro Kano, but then they would have fights with other old Jiu-Jitsu schools. And there was this one school, I think it was Fusen Ryu, Ryu being school. Is that correct? Do you know that Japanese word, Ryu?
No.
Okay, anyways, well, you're learning Japanese, so maybe you'll... But I think Ryu is school.
Okay.
Fusen Ryu was essentially a ground fighting school.
Okay.
Like, they did all their fighting on the ground. They would fight the Kodokan Judo guys and beat them consistently. So then Kano was like, hey, you're coming with us? And then what you got was Koshin Judo, or Kosen Judo. So there is still a ground fighting tradition in Judo. It's primarily in Japan, primarily in universities, and it's team competitions, not individual. So it's more like a high school wrestling meet. You score points for the team.
Right.
So you'll sacrifice yourself for the team should you need to. Anyways, so you see Kano doing almost all stand-up. Then he realizes ground fighting is a big deal, so he's like, come on in. He brings a dissimilarity in.
Right.
Maeda, Count Koma, goes to Brazil to make money doing more or less carnival wrestling or catch-as-catch kind of wrestling. And he meets these rich Brazilians in the Gracie family who weren't initially from Brazil. I don't remember if they were Irish or Scottish,
Okay.
but they're like Gracie. That does not sound like a Portuguese name. So you see them over there, and then what they do is they realize that they've got an advantage because they purposefully fight. They have large matches in Brazil called Vale Tudo, which is more or less no holds barred, more or less.
So you're saying like they have more experience.
Yeah, and what they realize. But, the Gracies are well known for heavy negotiations before a fight to stack the deck in their favor. But it's not necessarily something talked about a lot. Anyways, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Rorion Gracie was trying to show why his style was the best.
Right.
So he staged the first UFC, and they put in Royce, because Royce didn't look particularly menacing.
Right.
Not a particularly large guy, and he beat everybody. Right? So they were trying to show Gracie Jiu-Jitsu was the best. So it was literally a sales tactic. But what ended up happening was you had all these stand-up fighters. All they would do was stand up. They didn't grapple much.
Right.
And then they were like, whoa, this grappling stuff. Whoa.
Right.
So then it became this mix and this meld. So what's been happening in mixed martial arts is purposeful testing of an idea in live combat. And then you're like, okay, throw that one out. Bring this one in, throw that one out. So almost everybody can grapple to some degree now, otherwise they just get exposed really fast.
Right.
The person who talked about that idea first and is credited with the idea in popular culture is Bruce Lee. Okay. His concept being, take what is useful, discard what is not, make the rest uniquely your own.
Right.
Or make what is left uniquely your own, depending on, I don't remember exactly how the quote goes, but people will say that traditional martial arts styles were static. And if you actually look at them in their history, they weren't static at all. And even I've shown you some videos about early Okinawan karate or Todi, Chinese hand.
Right.
But then the Japanese were like, we don't want that. We want the Japanese stuff.
Right.
So way of the empty hand.
Right.
So, and they ignored the weapons, the kobudo. They ignored the weapons. They're like, we got weapons. We got samurai.
Right.
Like, we got kendo. What do we need your weapons for? Shut up. So. But the idea is that some of those early well-known karate figures from Okinawa were like, no, let's just keep testing it. Most karate kicks that we would consider karate kicks, I believe it was Gichin Funakoshi's son, and that's Goju Ryu, which is the style that you'll see in the Karate Kid.
Right.
Daniel-san and Miyagi.
Mm-hmm.
Was it Miyagi? No, Chojin Miyagi. Chojin Miyagi. I'm messing some stuff up. I'm mixing some lines up. I know that I am.
Okay.
But anyways, I think it was Gichin Funakoshi's son was hanging out with a French kickboxer, Boxe Française, Sabat.
Right.
And he's like, those are some cool kicks. Can I use them? Yeah. So a lot of karate kicks are French. It's like, no, the kicks are kicks. But where I learned them, the Okinawan guy that learned them in Japan from a French guy made them into this thing that goes around the world and it's Japanese.
Right. So learning dissimilar, making it your own, and spreading that knowledge.
So there's just many, many situations where you get evolution or revolution by engaging with dissimilarity in a large scale. And then it can get hidden. But so the idea being that if you hang out with people that agree with you right now, what does that turn into?
Turns into just a big horde of people
That think
and
they're awesome.
And think that they're awesome, but also just know the same stuff. They don't.
Yeah.
They're not developing or learning.
It's harder to develop in that situation. Instead, you can develop to the top level of the group, right? But you hit that ceiling because the group doesn't hold knowledge that would allow you to get past the group. You might by accident, right? But it's easier to do when you engage knowledge that doesn't exist in the group, right? One of the things that I've purposely said is that I've learned osteopathy, right? I could be considered a content expert on osteopathy. You can argue with me on that. Some people would agree, some people would disagree, and that's okay. I have no purposeful desire to engage with people within my profession to learn more about my profession.
Okay.
Because I learned osteopathy from osteopathic practitioners, right? Therefore, I learned what's contained within the profession, within the knowledge base, right? Did I learn everything? No. I learned the important things.
Right.
If I want to get better at it, if I want it to progress on some level, am I more likely to find that inside or outside?
Outside, which is where you've been looking. You've been looking in different practitioners, you've been looking in different fields, and you've been even looking outside of that practice in itself, where you're just looking at movement and the body and everything else.
The thing that actually has, for a period of time, gave me the most insight as to how to describe things is grappling. Right? It's controlling another person's body. Right? One being for therapeutic aim and one being for just dominance.
Right.
Like it could break your arm.
Right.
So, but the concepts that guide them is controlling another person's body. So the concepts should have extreme overlap. Right? So I'm like, oh, okay. And then as far as teaching it to people, right? Well, I said, if I learn how to teach osteopathy from people who teach osteopathy, I can learn no more than they know about teaching. I'm doing a degree in health science education. So the idea of health science education is it's primarily rooted in educating physicians, but there is not one type of physician in the world. There are people who hold the title physician with many specialties. Right. And then, but when you use the term health science education, what they're doing is they're also engaging the knowledge from nurses, right? Physiotherapists, occupational therapists. They're just saying, look, if it's a healthcare field, we're going to include stuff. But the dominant driver is good pedagogy, good teaching, right? You need some domain-specific knowledge with how to teach physicians because there may be some specific details, or how to teach healthcare practitioners because there may be some specific details that need to differ somewhat from teaching, 4-year-olds. Right. The mechanisms are the same, but maybe the window dressing needs to be a little bit different, and you can see that. So I'm like, why would I learn more about teaching osteopathy from osteopathic teachers? Right. Because they're currently of the opinion that what they're doing is correct and working. So I wouldn't be able to identify where it isn't working as good as it could if I stayed in that paradigm. I got to go outside that paradigm to see, is there another angle? Right.
And going outside of that paradigm gives you that angle.
It gives me a chance at it.
Gives you a chance.
It doesn't guarantee it, but it gives me a chance at it, right? So no matter what I'm doing, I'm like, okay, well, I've got the core, but I'm not staying here anymore. Right. That's how I've been purposeful, right? I don't know if I've been purposeful about it my whole life, but I have definitely been purposeful about it as an adult, right? I might have done it accidentally when I was younger, which is why I was able to kind of bring it into a purposeful and articulatable, or an idea that I can articulate. But I'm not going to stay learning from the people in the one field because I cannot go past what they know. And if there's knowledge that exists right now that can help all of us, but it's not in this room, I'm going to go to another room. Right. That's how I happen to do it. So, because we've been talking about it, are there any other areas where you can see that's happened? Or, I mean, obviously you're on the spot and you were stretching yourself when I presented it to you, so maybe there's nothing. Like, if there's nothing, that's fine.
So are you saying, is there another example
that you can think of?
That I can think of. Not at this time, but I was going to ask, if anyone is an expert in something, in a field of knowledge and domain-specific knowledge, based on what you're talking about now, would it be beneficial to us and them and everyone who has that has domain-specific knowledge to reach out and try to apply or get knowledge from a different field. And
I think it would be,
Yeah.
but it might be hard for them to engage it just because they're so much of an expert.
Right.
And they're like, well, no, that wouldn't work here for this reason. That wouldn't. They might be. It might be too easy for them to figure out why it wouldn't work, as opposed to say, well, let's try.
Right.
Right. So this is where you get multidisciplinary education. Right. So you're trying to bring people into a discipline from another discipline to make it explode. And
Right.
sometimes it's fantastic, and other times it's just difficult because each discipline has a culture.
Right.
And each discipline has individuals who are so, like, such high-level experts that they can figure out why your idea won't work. Like,
But they're not spending the time to try and figure out if it would work.
I would guess.
Right.
I'm not 100% firm on that, but that's
Right.
kind of where I would see it.
Okay.
Right? Does that help you understand the concept better?
Yes.
This is good. Anything else to say?
Oh, good.
All right, fantastic. Senor.